Hello and well met. This is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today we're going to take a look at the Monsters of the Multiverse content. It has been released today, a day earlier than it had previously meant. So without further ado, I'm going to get right into this. Let's take a look at what we're getting if we purchase the product. So right now I'm in the modules area and I have the content loaded, so it is in my library. And what I'm doing is taking a look at some of the races that they provide. These are player character races. Some of these are repeated in other content, so we're going to be able to actually take and unload some of these extra books for character creation. So that's kind of nice. So it kind of consolidates all the special races that are outside the standard player's handbook. That's kind of what this has done. There are some changes to the lore, so keep that in mind. And also, I thought of something that may or may not affect you, but if you are using third-party content that pulls from the older books, like the racial stuff, it may not pull from there if you don't have those books loaded. So you might have to do that until the publishers or the authors figure out a way to pull from both books, or you might have to keep the older source books open. So this is for character creation, the player's part of the modules. So what I'm going to do is go through some of these, and then we'll talk about a little bit about the NPCs and compare what the stat blocks look like and those sort of things. So let's take a look. So this is all the Fantastical Races, which is in Chapter 1. And then Chapter 2 has the bestiary with all the monsters. And then there is a stat blocks by environment table. So there's some pretty cool environment tables that they've included, which I always thought was a kind of a missing component. So that's pretty cool because that was one thing that a lot of older editions did very well. Is they not only sort it by CR level and by your alphabetization, and also the other types of things like races or such. They've now broken it down by environment, which is really cool. So the premise here, though, is that I wanted to show that you can leave some of these older books open, but I would say that if depending on what you're doing, you may or may not have to turn them on or off. Depends on how you're creating your characters. So again, if you're using like third-party content that pulls over the races from the older books, you might have to wait a little bit till those are updated, or leave those open when you're creating characters. As far as the lore books go, that's up to you, but some books come with 2 different versions. So I'm going to go through and take a look and see which modules. I mean, I'm assuming I'm not going to use any extensions or any third-party content. So I'm going to go through these modules and see which ones are kind of redundant for me. So if I go to the Fantastical Races, like the Aarakocra, we won't need that book, or whatever that comes in. So instead of doing it this way and trying to figure out which book it is, I'm going to go through the books and see which ones we want to keep loaded. So for instance, Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, if you go to you click on it, if you have that loaded, and then you go to your races area, it'll pop up to which one. So we want to keep this one because this one doesn't detail the dragon. So that's a lot newer. Ghost of Saltmarsh doesn't have any. There's the Monsters of the Multiverse. Mordenkainen. So this has some races in there. So you have different variations, but you have like the Gith and the Githzerai, which is the Githyanki. You have gnomes in here, and the ones that they have put in here is the deep gnome. So that's already covered in this particular book. So there's a deep gnome here. So technically, you don't even have to have this book loaded anymore if it's not pulling on anything or on any third-party content. So if you go to the activation window, I'm going to actually deactivate that content because I'm not planning on using any extensions. So if I just go to my load filter, which is what I have loaded, and I come through here and I take a look at this, I'm going, okay, so I don't need Mordenkainen's. I mean, for character creation, that is. So that's that. So you go down systematically and just see what we got. So Tasha's has some races in here. So let's take a look. That's the custom lineage. So we don't need to mess with that. So that'll stay the way it is. Witchlight. So get the races there. So I know the fairy and the Herringun are already a part of this, so we don't even have to. We don't have to remove that, or we don't need to use that. So I can unload the Wild Beyond the Witchlight player's manual. So this is what I'm saying. Like, there's some redundancies that you may or may not have to use depending on the content and how you're building your characters. Like I said, if you have a third-party product that pulls all the coding and stuff, you might have to leave the older books open until you get the characters created at least. I don't know how it works, but that's something I thought of earlier that might be a thing, unless they've already updated their content. So the other thing was, when I purchased this online, the price was $30, but since I have all of the DnD5e content, the actual cost is like $25 and some change. So you get like $4 or $5 off if you own all the other content. So it's not as expensive when you add it to your cart. All right, so I'm going to take and go back to my load filter here, and I'm only looking at the stuff that I have loaded. So I don't really need the this Witchlight for character creation. So I can unload that. So that's kind of a nice consolidation here of different races and such. So I'm going to go to, I know the Tomb of Annihilation doesn't have any races. The Turtle package, I know you can get rid of that one because you have a Turtle here and a Tabaxi and some other races. So we don't really need that. So I think the Tabaxi actually comes from another book. So we don't need the Turtle package, which is what you used to have loaded when you were creating characters. So that is that. Okay, so Van Richten's guide, races. So this has the damn fear, and what else does it have in here? Yeah, so you would still need this one, the Hex Blood. Yeah, so that's the kind of a Van Richten's guide, so you probably need that. So Volo's guide is one of the ones that's going to get replaced quite a bit. So you have the Azamar, the Bugbear. So yeah, that's one of the books that's definitely replacing that. So if I go to my loaded library activation list, there's Volo's guide right here, so I can unload that. So if you can see, it's kind of consolidated a lot of the extraneous books that came out. We already figured out Tasha's. Let's check out Xanathar, see what they've done anything with there. So Xanathar's guide, everything player's guide. Does that have races in it? No. So there you go. So I got rid of about 3 or 4 different books that you don't need. So I still have the player's handbook, the D&D Sword Coast Adventures guide, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, the Tomb of Annihilation. That just has some backgrounds in it. Van Richten's, Xanathar's, and that's it. I mean, those are the main books that I have loaded. So that cuts down on your memory load, and it also kind of cleans up your list here, so you don't have this big, huge, whopping list. Now, one of the things I was mentioning earlier is that if you have an extension that actually pulls the data from the older books, you might have to leave those loaded until those get sorted out. But nonetheless, this is my library now of character creation books. There are a couple, like the Saltmarsh one, that just gives you background, so we don't necessarily have to unload it because there's no races in there. So these are just books that give you a little extra stuff for character creation. So that's pretty nice. You cut down about 3 or 4 books that you don't need, like the Turtle package and Volo's and Mordenkainen's. So that's pretty nice. And I think there was one other that I unloaded. That's handy for if you were going to create a character and you don't want a bunch of extra stuff in there, that might be handy for that. So kind of keep in mind that's one of the features that is nice about this is that you have all these racial options, but now you don't have to have 50,000 books loaded. So that is one good thing about this. One complaint that people had was that the lore has been updated. So if you like your NPCs and your characters to exist in a certain setting or a certain module, they've kind of moved away from that, and they're kind of making the races available for everything. And that's one of the things they've done to try to diversify the gameplay, is to try to get away from making the races exclusive to a certain setting. Okay, so the next thing is the bestiary. So let's take a look at that. So I have the monster manual loaded here. So if I click on NPCs, this is the monster manual NPCs. And then I want to go to the multiverse and go to the NPCs from here. So the way this is sorted is this is by alphabetization. So I'm gonna bring up that sort of sorting option here. So as you can see, there's some different creatures in here. They're not all the same. It looks like they've added a bunch of new creatures in here that are not necessarily in the other book. So it's not too redundant when it comes to the monster manual versus what you're getting with the newer multiverse content, because it's a different book. So you're going to have a lot of different things. One of the things they did mention is they're taking these and they're putting them so that they're in alphabetical order instead of having them in elf and then you have different subclass or sub races inside of elf. So they don't alphabetize this whole thing. So like the Dwergar, for instance, it's broken up into 4, 5, 6 different things here, but they all have a certain way that they've made this so that it's in alphabetical order. So you're not searching through dwarf and then going to the Dwergar section. You're actually just going to have everything listed in alphabetical order. So that was kind of cool that they did that. Stat blocks are just slightly different. For instance, this is a dwarf, a Dwergar despot. So you'll notice that the proficiency bonus is here highlighted. And what they've done is they've taken some of the spellcasters and added it to make it a little bit more usable. So the evoker, for instance, you don't have necessarily the spell list is not as prominent as it used to be, and they actually have some abilities here that are changing the way that some of these things work. Like this is a sculpted explosion, and then you have your at-will spells here, which is your spell casting. So they've changed that up a little bit. You don't have your casting levels as much as you used to. I mean, you still have your spell save DC in that. But what I'm saying is the way it's put into Fantasy Grounds is it's more at will than it was before, which was like a leveled thing. So it's a little different there. This is read only, but if you wanted to break down the stat block, you can make a copy of it. So there's some changes. So the alignments are definitely something that they've reworked. So if you go to Dwergar, for instance, they changed them to any alignment. You don't necessarily have evil anymore. It's just medium humanoid dwarf, any alignment. But it might state somewhere that they tend to be evil or something like that. So it just depends. So like the same thing with the drow. A drow matron mother. Well, you'd think they would be evil, but it says typically neutral evil. So they've kind of reworded that so that you still have the saying in there, but that doesn't mean they're always evil. So that's just some of the things they've done. So they gave her a demon staff, which is really cool. A tentacled rod. Divine flame is something that they might use all the time. And then these are all of their spell casting. So these are the charisma-based stuff. And then their legendary actions, and they really kind of broke that down into a little bit more or less, making the NPCs a little bit more playable. Because what they were finding is that people were digging through spell lists trying to figure out which spells, and a lot of the spells didn't really pop out, when you're using these. So that's something that's changed a little bit in regards to Fantasy Grounds, the DnD5e rule set. So I'm going to take and add this drow matron to the combat tracker and take a look at it, what it looks like here. So if you go to the offensive area, you'll notice that all of these spells are here if you need to use them. But there are no, I don't see any spell levels anymore. So you don't have to keep track of how many spells were used necessarily. The way they change the spell casting is a little different. So that's something you'll have to get used to with the NPCs, that is. So that's some of the changes that I've noticed right away. Like I said, the book is like $30, but if you own everything, I think it's like $25 or maybe $1 more or less. And then you won't need quite as many books. So that's another thing that would be beneficial if you knew that, you don't have to load 50,000 books for character creation. You just have the main ones. And like this elemental evil, I mean, there's races in here. I don't even need that one anymore. So I can go to my my books and filter it out to the ones I have loaded, and I can actually unload that too. So that's basically what you have. So you have Fizbins, you have a couple extra books here that give you, some backgrounds and non-racial stuff, and then you have the player's handbook. So really, you're cutting back on quite a bit of books that you have loaded. So you don't have to have a lot of this stuff loaded anymore. So that's just a quick preview of that. And when you actually get into the actual content for the book, I'm going to filter this down to the Monsters of the Multiverse. This is the actual images area. So when you take a look at these, you get these really nice photos that come straight out of the books. And they've been transparencied so that they don't look so blocky. And they're actually a little bit more useful. Like if you wanted to potentially use some of these assets and layer them into an image that maybe you're making in Fantasy Grounds, you might be able to use it more. So like if you wanted to use this Warlock, the Great Old One or something, you might be able to use that picture inside of a different type of scene, so it's a little bit more useful to you. So that's kind of cool. They're kind of shifting now that we can have a little bit nicer images. So yeah, there's some pretty nice art in this. I don't want to spoil all of the artwork for you, but nonetheless, character creation is going to be a little different. Matter of fact, I'm going to try one just to see what it does. I'm going to do a real basic Dwergar fighter or something like that. So I'm going to go to characters, and I'm going to go to the character wizard, and I'm just going to go. Let's see, Monsters of the Multiverse. I always want to say universe. I don't know why, but okay. So that's the standard array. So I'm just going to do a dice roll, see what I come up with. Yeah, that was a horrible dice roll. So, anyways, this is basically. I'm just going to go back with the standard array. Okay, so 15, 14, 13, 12. Okay, yeah, that's fine. So I just left that. So I'm going to go to the racial options. So now that I have less books loaded, I mean, I'm still having all these different races here that I can pick from. So I got elf, but then I have the Eladrin, deep gnome. So it kind of expands this out a little bit. So let's go with the Dwergar. Let's see. So here's the Dwergar. So your racial modifiers, you can do the choice, which is Tasha's, or you can do the regular, 2 and 1 for your assigned ability score. So I'm going to go to the Tasha's one. Now you can pick one of these to increase. So I want to go with his, let's go with his con. There's one choice. Let's go with his dex and wisdom. So there we go. So there's the choices that I made. And then your race choice has already been made. And go over to class. So this one, you're going to pick your actual classes. So some of the other books you'll have to leave open, the ones that don't have racial options, so if you have more class choices. So I'm going to go with a fighter. That's always fun. And then I'm going to give him athletics, and let's go with intimidation. Okay, so there's that. And then all your background options. I want to make him a crafter. I think he's like a gemologist or something like that, or he works with gemstones, so I'll give him that. And then I get to pick a language. So he already has, let's see, doesn't have any languages yet. So I want to go ahead and give him Dwarvish. That seems like he'd have that. And maybe he has common too, so we'd have to add that. And then he's going to have, let's see, jeweler's tools. There we go. So that is definitely a good thing right there. And then he doesn't have any feats. So once you're happy with all your choices, then you can go ahead and hit commit. And yep, so that's good. So I was able to create the character, not too many problems there. I did notice that some of the racial languages weren't there, but that's not a big deal. I type those in. So if I go to my abilities area, I can just add another line here, type in common. I think that's the only thing that I would need to add. Other than that, it looks pretty good. So there are some new portraits added, so let's take a look at those. So if I left click, mouse click on this portrait image, and then I go to the alphabetized version of this. So here's Mordenkainen, here's Monsters of the Multiverse. So you're getting about 50 different new things. So yeah, here's all the new different looks. So here's the Dwergar. Yeah, here that's pretty cool. So I think I'm going to. This is a Dwergar Warlord. This is a certain Dwergar, so I'll just go with the Dwergar Warlord. There we go. So you got some extra images, you got some extra portraits, you got some changes that have come up that you don't have to load 50,000 books. And like I said, you'll still have those books if you own them. It's just that they've changed the lore. Like I said, some of your I don't know if it's tied into your third-party content or not, so just be careful with that. So if you're going to build a character and you're expecting some sort of automation, you might have to leave the older books open while you're creating characters, just in case. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So don't really need to do much more. Yep, so there's my traveler's pouch. Yep, pretty cool. And then when you want to level up, you just go to the class and level area, open that up. Let's go with level up. We're going to go up to level 2. You get action surge at that point. There's your feats, class, stats. Yeah, cool. So that just added some hit points. It added some of the abilities and traits that come with being a second level fighter. And then you have these fighting style options that you have to choose. So these are not automatically, they don't come up as a choice. You have to actually pick one of those manually. That's it. So that's all I have. I just wanted to kind of give you a quick review of what's in the books. So I'll go to modules. You go to the Monsters of the Multiverse. And in here you'll see it's broken down by images, items, NPCs, and then the NPCs have a sort, and then there's races, tables, and then your reference manual. So if you open up the reference manual, that's the actual book. And in here, you'll just kind of go through. You can see that chapter 1 is all the playable races that they've combined together from all over from different places and different content that's been released over the last 5 or 6 years. And then you have a bestiary, which is more creatures. So who would not want that? That's really cool. And then at the end, you have your stat blocks by environment table, which is really cool. I like that they break these down into environmental or biome encounters. So that's your appendices. So that's pretty cool. Not bad. It just doesn't look like it's a bunch of crap. You're getting what you're getting. You're getting playable races and you're getting more monsters. So that's not bad. And then it also cuts down on your load, so you don't have to load 50,000 books. That's really cool. So anyways, that's the advantage of getting that. So if you already own all of the older content, you have those races. If nothing else, you're getting more monsters and artwork. So and the choices of the portraits. So even if it's not a great value for us that already own everything, at least you're getting more monsters and more artwork. So there's that. So anyways, take care, everyone. Hopefully this helps a little bit. Again, this was Monsters of the Multiverse, the Fantasy Grounds version. I didn't go into too much detail or show off too much because I didn't want to spoil everything. But I certainly wanted to kind of give you an idea of what to expect. And also, I've given you some tips, like maybe if you have content that pulls from one of the older books, you might have to leave those loaded, but I don't know. Anyways, take care, everybody.